Welcome to the dark corners of your imagination, where nightmares take form and shadows hold secrets. This is Mr. Night's Scares Story, your gateway to the macabre, the unexplained, and the terrifying. Here, we dive deep into the spine-chilling stories that keep you awake at night, true tales of haunted places, unspeakable horrors, and things that go bump in the night. From cursed objects to paranormal encounters, from urban legends to sinister truths, we uncover it all. But beware, these stories have a way of lingering. Once you hear them, they might follow you, whispering in the dark when you're all alone. So, if you dare step into the unknown, subscribe, turn off the lights, and join us as we venture into the shadows. This is Mr. Night's Scares Story, where fear finds you. Story number 1. The Curse of Black Hollow Road. In the rural countryside of Pennsylvania, there's a narrow stretch of asphalt known as Black Hollow Road. Locals avoid it at all costs, especially at night. The road is infamous for its eerie silence, sudden fog, and the inexplicable feeling of being watched. But its true terror lies in the stories of those who traveled it and never came back. According to legend, Black Hollow Road is haunted by the ghost of a woman named Evelyn Kane. Evelyn was a widow who lived on the road in the 1800s. She was accused of witchcraft by the townsfolk after a series of mysterious deaths in the village. One cold October night, a mob dragged her from her home and burned her alive at the crossroads of Black Hollow Road. As she died, Evelyn screamed a curse. "Those who walk my road shall walk it forever." Jared, Mike, and Emily were college students visiting the area during fall break. They'd heard the tales about Black Hollow Road and decided to drive it for a thrill. "It's just a story," Jared said, shrugging as they piled into his beat-up Jeep. "People make this stuff up to scare tourists." "Yeah, but what if it's true?" Emily asked, clutching her jacket. "Then we'll have the best ghost story to tell back at school," Mike laughed. The sun was setting as they reached the entrance to the road. A rusted sign hung crookedly at the side. "Turn back." At first, the road seemed ordinary. It was lined with dense trees whose branches formed a canopy overhead, blocking out the moonlight. Jared turned on the high beams, but the thick fog that rolled in made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. "This is creepy," Emily whispered, glancing out the window. The farther they drove, the more unsettling the road became. The temperature inside the car dropped, and the radio cut out, replaced by static. "Why is it so cold?" Mike muttered, rubbing his hands together. "Old car," Jared said, though his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Then they heard it, a faint tapping on the roof. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. "It's probably just a branch," Jared replied, though he didn't sound convinced. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if something or someone was walking on the roof. Suddenly, the car jolted, as though they'd hit something. Jared slammed on the brakes, and the Jeep skidded to a stop. "What was that?" Mike asked, peering into the fog. They all got out, flashlights in hand, but the road was empty. No animal, no debris, just the unbroken line of asphalt disappearing into the mist. Then Emily screamed. On the side of the road, scrawled in dirt on a large rock, were the words, "You can't leave." Shaken, they hurried back into the Jeep and drove on. The tapping had stopped, but the air felt heavier, pressing down on them like a weight. Then they saw her. A woman stood in the middle of the road, wearing a tattered white dress. Her hair was wild and matted, her head bowed. "Should we stop?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No way," Jared said, gripping the wheel. As they drove closer, the woman's head snapped up, revealing hollow eyes and a twisted grin. She raised one hand, pointing at them. The headlights flickered, and the engine sputtered. "Jared, go!" Mike yelled, but the Jeep wouldn't move. The woman began to walk toward them, her movements jerky and unnatural. Her feet didn't touch the ground. "She's floating," Emily whispered, frozen in terror. The woman's grin widened as she reached the car. She placed her hand on the hood, and the metal hissed as if it were burning. Suddenly, the engine roared to life. Jared slammed on the gas, swerving around her. "Don't look back," he shouted. But Emily couldn't help herself. In the rearview mirror, she saw the woman standing in the middle of the road, watching them. Then she started running impossibly fast, keeping pace with the car. No matter how far they drove, the road didn't end. The trees and fog seemed to stretch on forever, looping endlessly. "This isn't right," Jared muttered. "We've been driving for hours." Emily checked her phone. It was 3:33 a.m., the same time it had been when they first entered the road. "It's like time stopped," Mike said. Then the Jeep stalled again. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness. In the silence, they heard it, the tapping on the roof, louder than before. Terrified, they huddled together in the car. The tapping grew into pounding, and the Jeep rocked as though something massive was on top of it. Suddenly, the roof caved in, and long, skeletal hands reached inside. The woman's face appeared in the shattered window, her hollow eyes boring into Jared's. "You belong to me now," she whispered. Jared screamed, and everything went black. The next morning, a farmer found the Jeep parked at the side of the road. The doors were open, the seats empty. There was no sign of Jared, Mike, or Emily. Only deep claw marks gouged into the metal, and the words, "She watches," scratched into the hood. Locals say the three students became part of Black Hollow Road, just like Evelyn Kane's other victims. And at night, if you dare to drive the road, you might see them standing at the edge of the fog, waiting for you to join them. Story number 2. The Haunting of Devil's Bend. In the Appalachian Mountains, nestled between two steep cliffs, lies a treacherous curve known as Devil's Bend. Locals say it's cursed, and for good reason. Dozens of accidents have occurred there, most of them fatal. People report seeing strange lights, hearing screams, and feeling an unshakable sense of dread as they approach the bend. Some believe the road is haunted by the spirits of those who've died there, while others say it's something older, something evil that's always been there. For Jordan, a long-haul trucker, Devil's Bend was just another stretch of road. He'd heard the stories but dismissed them as superstition. That was until one stormy night when he found himself face to face with the truth. The rain was relentless, pounding against the windshield as Jordan maneuvered his semi-truck down the winding mountain road. His headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the narrow lanes made every turn a gamble. Just a few more miles, he muttered to himself, checking the GPS. But as he neared Devil's Bend, the GPS glitched, the screen flickering before going dark. "Great," he groaned, smacking the device. Then his radio crackled to life, though he hadn't turned it on. Static filled the cab, followed by a faint, distorted voice. "Turn back before it's too late." Jordan froze, his hands tightening on the wheel. He glanced at the radio, but the voice was gone. As he approached the curve, a flash of lightning illuminated the road. That's when he saw it. A woman standing in the middle of the bend, drenched and barefoot, wearing a white dress that clung to her thin frame. Jordan slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the wet pavement. The woman didn't flinch. She just stood there, staring at him with hollow, lifeless eyes. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Jordan called, rolling down the window slightly. She didn't respond. Instead, she raised a hand and pointed toward the cliffs. "Get in," Jordan said, leaning over to unlock the passenger door. But when he looked back, she was gone. Shaken, Jordan continued down the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rain seemed to intensify, and the air inside the cab grew cold. That's when he noticed them. Two glowing orbs hovering in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought they were headlights, but they were too bright, too steady, and far too close. The lights followed him, growing larger and more intense. They weren't headlights, they were eyes. Panicked, Jordan pressed the accelerator, the truck roaring as it climbed the steep incline. But no matter how fast he went, the lights stayed behind him, unblinking and menacing. As he neared the tightest part of the curve, Jordan's headlights caught something in the road. A mangled car, its metal twisted like a child's toy. Slamming on the brakes, he brought the truck to a screeching halt. He jumped out, rain drenching him instantly, and approached the wreck. The car looked ancient, like it had been there for decades. yet the engine was still smoking. Inside were two passengers, a man and a woman. Their faces were frozen in terror, their eyes wide and mouths open in silent screams. Jordan stumbled back, heart pounding, but before he could react, the car and its occupants vanished. Terrified, Jordan ran back to his truck and climbed into the cab, slamming the door behind him. He tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. The lights were back, this time circling the truck like predatory animals. Shadows danced in the rain, and faint whispers seeped through the cracks of the doors. "Join us," the voices chanted, growing louder. Suddenly, the passenger door creaked open, though it was locked. The woman in white climbed in, her wet hair clinging to her face. She turned to Jordan, her hollow eyes locking onto his. "It's your turn," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. In a surge of adrenaline, Jordan grabbed his key and tried the ignition one last time. The truck roared to life, and he floored the gas pedal, the tires spinning before finding traction. The woman screamed, her voice echoing unnaturally, and dissolved into mist as the truck sped away. The lights and shadows gave chase, but as Jordan barreled through the curve, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the sky, and everything went still. When he looked in the rearview mirror, the road was empty. No lights, no shadows, just the endless rain. Jordan didn't stop until he reached the next town. Shaking, he stumbled into a diner and told the patrons about what had happened. An old man at the counter nodded grimly. "You saw her," he said. "The Lady of Devil's Bend. She shows herself to those she wants to claim. You're lucky to be alive." "Why does she do it?" Jordan asked, his voice hoarse. The old man shrugged. "Some say she's a victim of the road, looking for company. Others think she's the one who makes the accidents happen. Either way, once you see her, she doesn't forget." Jordan left the diner that night, but he never drove Devil's Bend again. Weeks later, he received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. His truck parked on the bend, with the woman in white standing beside it, smiling. It was 11:45 p.m. when they saw it. A narrow, unmarked road branching off to the right. It was paved but cracked, with weeds growing through the asphalt. A rusted sign leaned to one side, barely legible in the headlights. It read, "Route 66B, enter at your own risk." Ryan grinned. "This has to be it." Mia hesitated. The air seemed colder, and the darkness ahead felt thicker, almost alive. "Maybe we shouldn't," she said, gripping the seatbelt. "Come on," Ryan said, already turning onto the road. "It's just a road. What's the worst that could happen?" At first, Route 66B seemed like any other forgotten highway. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind. But soon things started to change. The mile markers were wrong. They were numbered backward, starting at 66 and counting down. "That's weird," Mia said, pointing to the marker. "It's just a joke," Ryan replied, though his voice was uncertain. Then the radio turned on by itself. Static filled the car, and faint voices whispered beneath it. "What the hell?" Ryan muttered, fiddling with the dial. The whispers grew louder, forming words. "Keep driving. You're almost there." They drove for what felt like hours, but the mile markers kept counting down. The gas gauge, too, seemed frozen, as if the car wasn't burning fuel. Suddenly, headlights appeared behind them, distant at first but quickly closing in. "Someone's behind us," Mia said, twisting in her seat. The lights were blindingly bright, and the car roared closer until it was tailgating them. Ryan sped up, but the other car matched his speed, its engine growling like a predator. Then it passed them, but not like a normal car. It didn't pull into the other lane. It simply glided ahead, its wheels never touching the ground. As it sped off, Mia caught a glimpse of the driver, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. "That's it. Turn around," she shouted. Ryan tried, but the road didn't end. Every time he tried to pull off, the asphalt seemed to stretch on forever. The mile markers reached 0, and the road opened into a strange, glowing city. Skyscrapers twisted unnaturally, their windows flickering with pale light. The streets were empty, but shadows moved behind the glass. "This isn't possible," Mia whispered, staring at the eerie skyline. The car slowed to a stop on its own. The dashboard lights flickered, and the whispers returned, louder now, coming from every direction. "Get out," the voices said. Ryan and Mia locked eyes, their breaths coming in short gasps. "We have to leave," Mia said, reaching for the door handle. "No," Ryan said. "Stay in the car. Don't listen to them." But the whispers became screams, and the car began to shake. From the buildings, dark shapes emerged. They were tall, humanoid, but their limbs were too long, their faces featureless. They moved toward the car, gliding like the phantom car had. Ryan slammed on the gas, but the car wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," Mia screamed. The shadows reached the car, their hands pressing against the windows, leaving black streaks like oil. One leaned close to Mia's window, tilting its head as if studying her. Then it smiled. In a burst of desperation, Ryan yanked the keys from the ignition and slammed them back in. The engine roared to life and the car surged forward. The shadows gave chase, their limbs stretching unnaturally as they ran. "Don't look back," Ryan yelled, gripping the wheel. The city blurred past them, the road twisting and turning impossibly. The whispers were deafening now, chanting their names. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the road ended. They skidded onto a familiar stretch of Route 66 under a starry sky. When they pulled into a gas station hours later, neither of them spoke. The car was covered in black handprints, and the mile markers on Route 66B were still burned into their minds. Mia searched online for more stories about the road, but none mentioned the city or the shadows. But one thing was clear: the road wasn't finished with them. A week later, Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "Come back. You're almost there." Story number 3. The Haunting of Devil's Bend. In the Appalachian Mountains, nestled between two steep cliffs, lies a treacherous curve known as Devil's Bend. Locals say it's cursed, and for good reason. Dozens of accidents have occurred there, most of them fatal. People report seeing strange lights, hearing screams, and feeling an unshakable sense of dread as they approach the bend. Some believe the road is haunted by the spirits of those who've died there, while others say it's something older, something evil that's always been there. For Jordan, a long-haul trucker, Devil's Bend was just another stretch of road. He'd heard the stories but dismissed them as superstition. That was until one stormy night when he found himself face to face